There are four versions of how Onitsha came to exist. Okay, one, from S.I. Bosa on the history of Onitsha. And the Onitsha were part of, they were Edo people. And then Esebeuku, and they migrated, okay, led by Chima, okay. Eluwa, who wrote the book Adonidu, claims that the Onitsha were part of that return migration, or that migration of Ndi Igbo when they left ILE IFE. So they stopped in Benin for several centuries and then continued their migration. The third hypothesis, which comes from Iseluku, there's a book, History of Iseluku Kingdom. Now, Chima was the 5th king of Benin. I'm sorry, the Chima was 5th king of Iseluku. That his father was the 4th, his grandfather was the 3rd, his great-grandfather was the 2nd, and then the 1st king of Iseluku was the son, the 2nd son of OBI the 1st of Benin. Which means that Benin kingdom, Oba sent his son, 2nd son, to go and form a new kingdom as a defense against Igala and Igbo attackers. That is their claim. That's how Iseluku got established. And that Onitsha is the 5th king of direct descent from Eweka the 1st. Now it gets interesting because Eweka the 1st is the son of Orameyon, who is the son of Oduduwa, established. And these Benin people now claim that very clear since the new Oba came onto the throne. So there are linkages which we need to figure out. That's the point I'm making. You know, and in all of this, Benin features very, very actively. And of course, the 4th migration, but actually Aro, because the Aros were itinerant people migrating from one place to the other. Aro medicine man went to Benin, established himself, became a soothsayer to the king. Then there was a disagreement and he came back. Okay, but then if you go through the history, you'll find that the Chima era existed before we know of the Aro migration. There's an Aro migration westwards and then came back again. So which of them? There are a whole lot of consequences, you know, in terms of, if you look at all these 4 theories. I discount the Aro hypothesis, but S.I. Bosa, Abundi Bini, Eluwa, Abia and Benin are migrated, and then of course Iseluku, that Abundi Seluku originally, but migrated from Benin. By the way, after Chima reigned, Iseluku went into crisis. Azolo who to replace him, went to crisis, which led to the migration of Oreze coming back to form Onitsha. But then other people from Iseluku went to found other communities, Isele Azaba, Isele Chima, Onitsha, Olona, etc., etc. Okay. But one thing is constant, that there was a migration from Benin. Okay. So the Oreze group then arrived, got across, and settled down. Okay. So we're looking at Onitsha now. From the time Oreze settled with his people, followed by Chimevi, Obi Chimevi, followed by other kings, up to Aroli. So from Oreze was the beginning of Onitsha, settling down. Aroli took it to the next level, and I look at the 3rd level now when Christianity and colonialism came up to the present time. Now, the components of Onitsha Donidu, which is Onitsha. Okay. The components, first of all, is the core group that Chima led up to wherever it was. And Oreze now led them across. And I was Umwezi Chima, comprising of Isiokwe, Olosi, Umwezi Arole, and Okebunabo. Okay. I'm for Umwezi Chima and Onitsha. The second group, Bundi Bayazo, the migration along the way. It all came up together. It all had their functions. Ugunobamba, Ekenu Bene, and all of that. The third group, Bundi Ekudolekudo, Nde Gala Ekudolekudo on the waterfront, who helped to ferry them across. They now constitute 3 villages, 2 villages, Obikboro, I'm sorry, not Obikboro, Obotu and Welekeke. Okay. Obikboro is also a Gala, but all their father be a Gala that married the daughter of Ezarole. Then the fourth group, Betazil Onitsha. Bundi Sizi Ani Bundi Ozo, Oze particularly, and Oze Noko Dinawunye a lot. Ogidi, Ubosi, and all of that. All of us are now integrated into Onitsha, what as we know today, 4 different groups, but into one. That's what we are today. Okay? And then, of course, in that dispersion from Iseluku, I mentioned there were about 19 communities on the western side of the Niger, Enuani, and Aneoma, that Bundi, who claimed descent from Chima. And then on the eastern side, well, Abo is also on the western side, but from Onitsha, movement, they went to Guta and founded Guta. And his other brother went to Abo and founded Abo. So all of that constitutes Umwezi Chima, as we know today. But there's more. There's more. Because on the eastern side of the Niger, Onitsha, Deputy Governor, are you hearing me? I will Onitsha, Bom. Onitsha Boma, Ititi. Onitsha Mi, Isu Ikwato, they're all in Abia State. Fabo Onitsha. And Ijuafa, those people always see themselves as slightly different from the larger community around them. Ijen Imo State. I'm very familiar with that one. Onichudo, Nambise, and Onishankwere, they're both in Imo State. And Ebonyi State, well, Onisha Hozara, Onisha Eza, and Hozara, well, Onisha Eba. And of course, the Enugu State, they will Onitsha Agu. Okay? So, that's what I'm trying to say. We are dispersed, all over the place. What are the connections between, with all these Onitshas, with the Chima dynasty? These are questions that should be answered. This is why we need this Center for Igbo Repository. So we can do research, we can do more research, and do more inquiries, go on the spot, look at the artifacts, do excavations, and find out the historical connections, and so on and so forth. We need to know. There's more. In Yoruba land, in Oyo State, and 4 communities that are spelled Onisa, O-N-I-S-A. We know in Yoruba, O-N-I-S-A is called Onitsha. So in Oyo State, there are 4 communities. In Oyo, 4 communities. Ogbomoso, 3 communities. Ogun State, 1. Osun State, 1. Are there any connections with Onitsha and Kaimau? Or is it a creation of their own, or whatever it is? We need to inquire. We need to find out how those people got to where they were. Because when Ife broke up, people migrated in different directions. Okay? People migrated in different directions. You see? So it could be that these people went on their own way when the main group was going, but we need to find out. We need to know, which is why research is important. So we fast track then to back to Onitsha itself. Okay, I've talked about the arrival of Oreze as the beginning of the foundation of Onitsha town, Onitsha community, Onitsha Donidu, or Onitsha Mili as we know it today. The next level was Ezaroli, who came from Igala and brought Igala royal traditions, which are far more sophisticated, moving Onitsha to the next level. And the third, of course, I said, was the arrival of Christianity and colonialism. And both of them arrived in the same vessel in 1857, the day spring, okay? Which better than Onitsha, under Obi Akazua, okay? Just to fast track, between 1863 and 1888, the colonial government or the colonialists extracted at least four treaties, there are a few more, but four major treaties from Ndi Onitsha, our traditional rulers, on the suppression of slave trade, on the prevention of human sacrifice, on the opening and encouraging of legitimate trade, on the protection of Christian missionaries, and on the cession of title. They took our land, we just signed and put our thumbprint, and then finally on the protection by the colonial government, which is why we became a protectorate. We became part of the protectorate. As we were getting the treaties from us, they were doing the same in Asaba, doing the same in Otmanam, doing the same in all the other communities. ILE IFE, Anyamaro. See? Whilst the colonialists were doing their own bits, trying to browbeat us and subjugate us, the Christians were also spreading Christianity. The CMS mission, I said, arrived in 1857 on the day spring. Ajayi Crowther, J.C. Taylor, and Simon Jonas. Ajayi Crowther was Yoruba, J.C. Taylor and Simon Jonas Bundi Igbo, slaves that were saved from the slave ships, taken to Sierra Leone, educated, and then they became missionaries and they came. And of course, they settled in Onitsha. Onitsha became the base for the Anglican CMS mission to spread Christianity up in the north into the middle belt, the south to the Niger Delta, east and west, and so on. And Onitsha became the seat. Ajayi Crowther eventually became bishop of what eventually became the whole territory of Nigeria, except Lagos, Ibadan, and Abeokuta, that were under the diocese of Sierra Leone, Freetown, Sierra Leone. So Onitsha became the headquarters of the CMS mission in the whole of Nigeria, under Ajayi Crowther. And following that was C.J. Patterson. Again, Onitsha, Christ Church Onitsha, with their thrones, became the Archbishop of West Africa from Onitsha, ruling the whole of West Africa Anglican Communion. So Onitsha began to acquire status with the church. Of course, many of our people became pioneers, missionaries, including Reverend Yemunam, Bishop Onyabo, and so on. As if by magic, 28 years later, the Catholic mission arrived at Onitsha. Again, made Onitsha their base, from where they spread Christianity. Reverend Father Lutz, then Bishop Shanahan, then Bishop Hiri, and so on and so forth. So Onitsha has been fortunate because with Christianity came education. So Onitsha people became, again, early beneficiaries of modern education. And of course, behind that also came medical services. See. But of course, there are backlashes because Christianity now says that polygamy is not the right thing to do. So, if you want to become a Christian, I think you should and marry only one, the first wife, and all of that. And that's created a pushback, from some of our people. A few other things that they were demanding, which by now authority and so on. In Onitsha, the big challenge the Christianity had, one, Ozo Onitsha. We still have issues, but we're in dialogue. See, Tata, asking if you can night no noka. You see, pastor Onitsha for issues or sit up and crack in she go night. So it's normalizing, and one of our very ardent Catholics, Ibu Diopa Lule Nabefa, and he was torn between he was torn between that and his Christianity. He went to the Archbishop Hiri. So they took a video of Ozo Onitsha. I went to Rome and presented it to the Pope. Pope said, I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't see anything wrong with that. So Ozo Onitsha goes to, and it's very fundamental to our spiritual beliefs. Okay. The second book, which again we've explained to the church. You see, if you dialogue, you get understanding, and sometimes even our masquerades, cause a problem. Onitsha became the foundation, and Onitsha has benefited on the back of the Christian schools, particularly the secondary schools, CKC, DMGS, QRC. Entry was very competitive. What happened? Private schools sprang up. New Bethel College, Africa College, Our Ladies High School, Washington Memorial, Etukuku Memorial, Zik Institute, New Era, so many. Onitsha now became the mecca for people who are seeking for secondary education from everywhere. So, Onitsha, Kandina military, who are military commanders, who are governors of states and everywhere, in the north and everywhere else. We can take over Nigeria. So Onitsha has benefited, okay? So we come to our culture, Onitsha culture. I'm just rushing because I don't want to hold you too long. Onitsha culture today and our traditions have four roots. Edo, which is Benin, Igala, Igbo, and then our own self-originated elements of cultural behavior, our norms and practices. Okay, Edo, our rare traditions come from Edo and Igala, mixed Edo and Igala. Okay, Ifulu, Abani, Dupetalo, Asaba. That is very much Edo symbolism, okay, which we have also. Certain other elements, which is Igala. Our spiritual beliefs, our traditional spiritual beliefs, are largely Igala and Igbo. Largely Igala and Igbo. Ndi Onitsha, more Afia, more Gonogo, Igala. We know the spiritual symbolism of Mogonogo. Na Saba, Obu, Egugu. Egugu is the equivalent for us. And the interesting thing, now Lagos, Mwelo Eyo, which they call Egugu also, and other Yoruba areas have Eyo. And Eyo in Yoruba land commands the same respect as Egugu na Saba, as Moafia and Onitsha. So there's some connection there. Then our social system is largely Igbo by acculturation. Okay? And then of course we have our own self-generated, internally generated elements of our culture and tourism. Then of course our governance and jurisprudence is largely Edo So ndị ichie anyị, okay, Ije na Edo, same titles of ndị ichie anyị are repeated, or copied it from there. Asaba has some equivalents, Iseluku has some equivalents, and so on and so forth. And the functions of ndị ichie are similarly the same. And of course, as we say, culture is never constant. It keeps moving and keeps evolving. Okay. I'll talk about our political system very quickly and our judicial system. The political system, our monarch, Igwe, is at the peak of it, supported by Ndiche, who we refer to today as the political heads of their various villages, etc. Ndiche originally were the warlords to protect our boundaries. Adanuzaya Kita, Ananuzaya by word of mouth, courts and all that. But they're the political heads of their various communities. And we meet together at the Council of Ndiche, where we discuss issues of the community under the monarchy, under the monarch. I went to yesterday. We had a 4.5 hours meeting yesterday. That's normal, okay? Today we have 24 Ndiche, but the total number we could have is 52. And those are established positions, established by our ancestors, which I can't even change. I can't add or subtract. If there are vacancies, we fill them in the fullness of time. Okay? And these shade in 3 categories. Ndiume, the muddy sea, and each of them looks after 1/6 of Onitsha. Which ones were Bolo, which ones were Kowai. Ndiume, they are the first class chiefs. And then, of course, Ndiokwa are the next, and Ndiokwa Reze, the third class. All of us have our duties and so on. On the other side, I am with Ndiopa. Ndiopa are the spiritual heads of their villages and their communities, etc. So only Onitsha, his village, is spiritually subject to Diopia. So I don't want to, if Onitsha, Diopa are Soplonichi. More no more. Diopa. I have to respect him as my Diopa. And I respect him as a Onitsha. Okay. Then other groups, constituent groups, Onitsha Improvement Union will celebrate its centenary next year. Actually, it was due this year. We'll celebrate it early next year. They're 100 years old. Doing what other town unions do, okay? But it was founded in Lagos, actually, as a welfare organization until they came back home and so on and so forth. Our age-grade societies perform very distinct roles in Onitsha. Depending on their age, the youngest ones do the job of protecting the community. Ajano batano bodo ofa katuli alu malifegeme. As we go older, and the older ones then join Ndiche in governance of the community. The balance, also, some of them are here. Each also is a spiritual anointing. It cannot be an Onitsha, it cannot be a Onitsha. So that's the significance of also Onitsha. It's a stepping stone to spirituality, our traditional superiority, to rise to higher levels. They perform their own social functions. Means you will not engage in anything that is not proper, and you provide leadership. That's what it's all about. And then, their primary purpose, they were in charge of the markets. They operated the markets. But also, they look after all our shrines and deities in Onitsha. And they look after the welfare of the women, the governance of the women, the Fanaka. Unfortunately, for over 100 years, I can shiro Omu no Onitsha. Omu bu onye si ndị Ikporo Onitsha. She is the leader of the women group. And Omu has almost the same authority as Eze Onitsha, except over the women. She will dress like Eze Onitsha, and in public events, she sits immediately to the left of Eze Onitsha. That is the role of the Omu. We're in dialogue, and someday we'll get it back. Then, of course, I will the Onitsha Youth Council. I think many of them are here. A very strong group, and their former leader, Honorable Ayamba, has done so well that the Anambra State government appointed him the Commissioner for Youths, and he's doing very, very well in that position. So that's our political setup. And the judiciary, we have stages. Okudapata between two people or between two groups. The Diopa of the community is the first level. Then Onyiche of the community is the next level. Then Obi in council sits in a court every Wednesday to adjudicate cases. And most cases are resolved at that level. Any appeal from there now comes to me as the final arbiter and the final ruler. But I can say to you that hardly, I can count number of cases in court to Igbo, and none of them has gone and come back to reverse the decision that the OBI of Onitsha, in consultation with the chiefs, has made. That is how we govern ourselves. Actually, in one of the cases that went all the way to the Supreme Court, Justice Mary Odili wrote a very strong note commending the Onitsha traditional judicial system. That if all other communities can do the same, then the workload of cases that go through the courts will reduce, and justice can be delivered faster. Onitsha, I said, the modern times started from the colonial and Christian era, okay, and kept growing. Local governments were formed, the market, administration, etc. The peak, in my own eyes, as a little boy growing up, the 1950s and 1960s were probably the high point of Onitsha as a city. In terms of the sense of industry, other professionals and so on, the expansion of the city, Fege was built, as a brand new planned environment community. I have to confess that as a primary school student, I had Fege on Saturday, Jebue block, and they give us 5 shillings after that. So we started earning money from primary school and so on. So those were the great days. There were cinemas, there were dance bands, there were bars where people go and have a good time. And people worked very hard and so on. And above that, the famous Onitsha market literature that are published, they're written and published within 1 week, Veronica, My Love, etc., etc. Onitsha market literature, which several scholars have done their PhD thesis on Onitsha market literature. The largest collection of those literature is in the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. Okay? So our ancestors created those literature, have to go to Hoover Institution to find out what is there. Now, this is what Chinua Achebe said of Onitsha market literature. So one of the most intriguing questions concerning this literature, why did it happen in Onitsha, has, however, not yet been fully answered, and I suspect will never be. It's a mystery, It is this area which interests me. The esoteric region from which creativity sallies forth at will to manifest itself. Then it says that Onitsha is the esoteric region from which creativity sallies forth to manifest itself. It's all we can do is to speculate that Onitsha is such a phenomenon. This is Chino Achebe writing about the Onitsha in its glorious days when everything was bustling. The spokesman newspaper was there. Everybody wants to read. Some people read it upside down. And politics was growing. Education, study centers, bookshops on New Market Road. Black and Maxwell. People who are doing their intermediate law studies, before they go overseas and so on. That was Onitsha for you. And Christmas time, New Year time, and then when Carnival, from Old Market Road, Obomano, down to Ven Road North, and then back New Market Road. Fantastic. Okay? And this is what the way Onitsha had been described in those days, Onitsha of yore. So it is remarkable for its almost mythological evocation of local history and belief. Alison Anderson, and then J.M.G. Leclerc won the Nobel Prize in 2008, and he wrote a biographical novel titled Onitsha. How did the Frenchman get to Onitsha? His father was working in CFAO Onitsha, and he came as a young man, and what he saw eventually converted into a novel. And he described Onitsha. He said the Onitsha indigene places high value on honor, decency, and amity. Leclerc. And then my friend Hank Eso, who is a newspaper columnist, said that those who knew Onitsha of yore, around 1960s, cannot forget its hidden allure, its mercantile exuberance, and unfeigned charm. Say, like Venice, Lagos, Las Palmas, New Orleans, or Mumbai, Onitsha had spirit and had gravitas. It had culture. Just as it had a seamy side and historical niche. These are the descriptions of Onitsha. When Onitsha was in its glory, Asaba was similar. And we had the ferry that crossed between. Crossing the ferry itself was an experience on its own. ILE IFE, and all of that. And Onitsha and Asaba were linked. They were growing side by side. Okay? Then came the Civil War, and everything changed. Civil War changed everything. Destruction, physical destruction, but probably more damaging was the psychological destruction the Onitsha felt. Other communities, the Anambra State, the southeast, Asaba was badly damaged. We all suffered the same thing. Okay, that's the turnaround. The same Hanke Shaw came back as well as Onitsha. So after the Civil War, see, Onitsha of yore was a fun place to be. However, much has changed now. Onitsha has lost its groove. From gravitas, it's lost its groove. Verve and much of its history. Onitsha remains, as ever, the sardonic city of drudge and enterprise, that so much effort yields little in recompense, and quality of life only conveys the infinite mockery and paradox of this sometimes feral city. Still, Onitsha remains untranslatable and unreplicatable. You must visit to experience it. So if I ago, so where do we go from there? How do we re-engineer and reposition and restore Onitsha? I came to the throne in 2002. Photo Burusuwedi. And I defined my philosophy for governance, traditional governance of Onitsha, as peace and reconciliation based on truth and transparency as foundation for sustainable development. Okay. We have to be transparent and we have to reconcile. It's important that you must reconcile. We've been working on it for all this time. And 2017, we've had several efforts, study groups, etc., etc. 2017, we set up what we call taking Onitsha to the next level. We had 15 study groups to study all aspects of Onitsha and come up with recommendations and so on. And then after 1 year, we got recommendations. We agreed on how to start the low-lying fruits that we can harvest. Then COVID came. A setback initially, but COVID got us thinking also, what after COVID? Because COVID revealed all social engagement to Onitsha. No marriages, no funerals, no title taking, and all of that. We realized how interconnected our local economy is to one another. If there's no ceremony, Ndine have no job. Ndine canopy have no job. Ndine lemaya have no job. Ndine achafele have no job. Photographers and so on. And how do they restart after COVID? Some of them are so beaten down, they couldn't restart again. So we started immediately, even during the COVID, to begin to think of post-COVID. Economic empowerment program, post-COVID. I had a couple of studies, and this is what I said. Setting up the study group, that we need to support the struggling and budding entrepreneurs in our domain in weathering the post-COVID-19 economic and social challenges. That is the target that we set. And then, when the study was over, they will set up what we call the Onitsha Advancement Foundation. And I said again, is to create and facilitate the development of programs and services that will foster a changed mindset, a participatory action, and empowerment in the lives of Ndi Onitsha Donidu and the community they serve. Okay. So we've been at it all along. We made a lot of progress and all that. On Sunday, we had our quarterly town hall meeting where Ndi Onitsha, wherever you are connected. 4 hours. We had people from 10 countries, Ndi Onitsha, connecting, where we discuss all these issues and map out the way forward. And then Onitsha Advancement Foundation is the platform for our development. We have two registered, it's registered with the Corporate Affairs Commission, with two standalone institutions on entrepreneurship development and leadership. The other one on computer, IT development. Okay? We want to make Onitsha a hub for IT development. The third one, which has not come into place, is the finance, microfinance institution to fund these young entrepreneurs. We've got a cooperative program, which has been initially very successful, but we're wobbling right now. We're looking at it. We have a health and well-being program where we manage our health, educational program, all of this, even our internal security. We have our own vigilante group, not the AVG of the government, our own internal vigilante group to service our people. So challenges. Now, most of these programs, the health and educational program, apply to any child in Onitsha, benefits from our educational program, wherever it comes from. The health program, if you walk in, we have a walk-in health center. You can just walk in as a nurse there. We will attend to you and can call a doctor and all of that available. But there's a bigger Onitsha cosmopolitan city now that has grown around, that has merged even with Obosi, with Mpo, with Ogidi and all of that. Those ones present a totally different challenge. Okay? Population is growing, youth unemployment, the transient population Onitsha becomes a repository. But they sleep rough, okay? General pay worker is terrible, okay? The infrastructure has not grown. Infrastructure has not grown. You probably see some roads that were built in the colonial times and so on and so forth. Inadequate and non-existent infrastructure, crime within, and Kinesia Bata is there. Of course, environmental pollution, noise pollution, air pollution. Onitsha generates the largest IGR in the state, and I think that's next to nothing. All the markets, the tax collected, we don't get money reinvested. And so those people who've been on Onitsha, and the Onitsha, and the majority now on the Onitsha, who contribute to that IGR, don't get the benefit of the IGR. The roads, where they live, and so on and so forth. That is the situation that you face. But then Onitsha, being what it is in the eyes of international organizations, especially the UN Habitat. So in 2009, UN Habitat did a study, a structure plan for Onitsha and satellite towns to remap and redesign Onitsha. Residential areas, industrial areas, etc. Onitsha now is the cosmopolitan, which should include the satellite communities, Ubosi, Bo, Ugidi, Nkwele-Zunaka, Nsugbe, etc. They did that and presented to our state government nothing. In 2010, at the Shanghai exhibition, Onitsha was designated one of the five fastest growing cities in the world, but with inadequate infrastructure, housing, roads, water supply, etc. And in 2012, UN Habitat came back again to do an urban profile report. First of all was the mapping up. The second time was how to implement. And then, of course, nothing has happened. And in 2016, the World Health Organization dropped the bomb and described Onitsha as the most polluted city in the whole world. Air pollution, 2016. So, Kefe Kemezo Onitsha, Agarapia ko nani yotua, okay. So we have to continue to advocate. My proposal, which I had submitted to the previous government, was to set up an Onitsha Metropolitan Development Authority, and empower it to take charge. Either you do Onitsha, Greater Onitsha, or you can even do Onitsha. Onitsha should be alone. Oka, Newi should be development authorities and so on. So it's been a long story, but I'm now at the conclusion, thankfully. If you read the main lecture, there are several issues that are there that I don't have the answer to. But I flag them, I give my own opinion when it comes to. But there's basically 4 areas that I want to I want to draw attention to in my conclusion. 1, it's important to establish the linkage between Igbo, Yoruba, Edo, and the other language groups. If you go back to that internal migration where we all took off from and then broke up, if that is true. But the truth of the matter that linguistic experts draw a connection between these people. If you don't come together, they also will defeat you. I don't want to say much more about that because it becomes the headline. It's very, very important that I can buy Siweputa. Any bad relationships in the past, maybe we can fix it and mend it, knowing that okay. Eluwa, his book, which is called Adonidu. That book is 700 pages long, and he made several claims about the history of Igbo, which has not received scholarly attention to authenticate it or otherwise. And he claimed there was a great empire called Adonidu that ended up, that ILE IFE was the capital of that empire. And the Igbo were the dominant people, Igbo na-achi ILE IFE, Adonidu, until the migration. We ought to authenticate it because it gives a new perspective to our relationships and who we are and where we came from. Third, Chima, from all indications, Chima abro Onitsha, na Munaindi no na Nioma, Chima na all of the southeast, Chima na Yoruba land, okay? And again, you see, we can build up relationships and bonds and figure out how we got to where we did and all of that. And then, of course, finally, the government, I've mentioned already, to pay attention to the re-engineering of the Onitsha metropolitan area is very, very important. Onitsha is the biggest city in Anambra State. You can't wish it away. And if you keep drawing IGR, you don't reinvest. It's like milking a cow without feeding the cow will die. Okay, so that's my fourth recommendation. And finally, I want to Center for Repository, Igbo Repository. We talk about digital library, etc., etc. The library. I want to announce for a start that Chima Museum, which we're building in Onitsha, has taken a step to digitize the entire academic and scholarly collection. Professor Richard Henderson and his wife, Helen Henderson, they are both social anthropologists, and all their academic life was devoted to the study of Onitsha. So they have manuscripts, they have scholarly papers, they have newspaper cuttings, they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photographs of Onitsha that don't exist anymore. Video recordings, traditional music, Egu Ayaka and such things. They recorded everything there in his house, his library in Tucson, Arizona. I go there once a year, and we've been digitizing all of this. It's cost a lot of money, but we've preserved Onitsha. And the beauty of digitization is you can replicate. So, BC, a copy of the Henderson digital material will be presented to the Center for Igbo Repository as a start. Richard Henderson is about 93 years old, and he still operates his website on Onitsha, amightytree.org. amightytree.org. You go there, there's a treasure of information on Onitsha. And then, of course, we'll put together a collection of books on Onitsha by different authors and present to the library also. One of them is a book edited by Professor Kirun Zewu, scholarly essays by different people. But the beauty of it for me is that it has close to 500 bibliographical references on Onitsha and Igbo. Bibliography, 500 items of bibliography. It's a treasure trove. All of that will come there. And finally, gratitude This lecture, I take responsibility. Whatever I said, I take responsibility. But I benefited a lot from two people who are very close friends, or who are academics, whose scholarly comments helped to enhance the quality of the lecture. As I said, the lecture is about 61 pages long. Professor P.J. Eze of University of Nigeria, Department of Anthropology, past president of the Anthropological Association of African Anthropological Association, is a good friend. And then, of course, Professor Jerry Chukwokulu, who is Jerry, get up. Yeah. They're my friends, and they've helped me a lot. PJ was assigned to some assignment by the Federal Ministry of Education, so he couldn't be here. So that's it. By na ekene amasi ndị Igbo malụ n'onwe unu. Know thyself. If you know thyself, onye ukwu efe na abụrụ eziokwu anyaze ya. But if you don't know ourselves, if people will take it. You see, that's very, very important.